We are not apart from nature. We are a part of it. And until such time that we can acknowledge that and find ways to build viable tourism enterprises that gives people a sense of stewardship and custodianship where they actually benefit as a result of tourism, then we're on a winning wicket. And that's what I try to create with African bush camps, that the communities that we serve intrinsically are vested in the wilderness by the fact that they're rewarded for being good custodians of these wilderness areas.
Every great travel journey begins with a question. Where to next? And how do we protect what makes it beautiful? Welcome to the Conscious Check-In, the podcast where sustainable hospitality, unforgettable travel, and bold conservation stories collide. I'm your host, Amy Wald, and this is your Conscious Check-In. Welcome back, everyone, to the Conscious Check-In. Today, we are talking to Beks Ndlovu. He is the founder of African Bush Camps. If you think that this only applies to safari operators, I want you to think again. The way they integrate conservation and community into the guest experience is really a blueprint for any hotel trying to stay relevant in a world where travelers are redefining what luxury means. Beks, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Amy. Thank you for having me. I'm great.
Wonderful. We're going to cover everything safari, your foundation, all the great work you are doing. And we hope that a lot of these lessons translate to wherever you are in the world as far as a tourism operator, a travel professional, and of course, a hospitality leader. But I would love for you to give the audience a little context on your history and how you came to create African bush camps today.
Thank you, Amy. I mean, if I have to describe African bush camps in a sort of a single line, we really are a conservation-driven safari company rooted in community ownership of wilderness areas. Now, what does that really mean if we expand it? I founded African bush camps really with the fundamental belief that tourism, when done properly, should protect the areas and the people that it touches. And it was really born out of my observations as a private guide taking groups of people all over Africa for over 10 years, that I realized that there were injustices to the land, to the people, and the wildlife, and those injustices needed to be addressed. And so I went about and developed my first safari camp, which was Somalisa Camp in Wanga National Park, which is in a village just outside which is a national park just outside the village that I was brought up in. So our model really straightforward it's about exceptional guided experiences, deep community integration, and conservation as a business discipline. It's not just a marketing slogan. We're not just hosting guests, we're actually stewards of landscapes, as I describe it. And I really truly believe if we do it right, the wildlife thrives, and we have this concept of theory of change around connected landscapes throughout Africa and thriving communities. And that's what we seek to do on a journey, not just on our own, but together with our guests and people that we do business with around the world.
Wow, that was a mic drop moment. So you said conservation as a business mindset. I absolutely love this. The heart of everything I do is turning the traveler into a conservationist. I really believe that if we can do that, we solve a lot of the problems of the world. But explain, what do you really mean? How could someone in Columbus, Ohio, or New York City, or the Caribbean take that same principle and put it into practice in their own business?
So, we have this strap line, Amy, that we say when we build camps where conservation, community, and commercial success reinforce each other, that's when we know we have a winning formula. So any guest that's traveling with us knows that already they're contributing to the success of conservation and building communities through their financial contribution. The people that we work with within the trade space, or the guests that book with us, we have these conversations about where their money is going. We have an impact report that we release each year that talks about some of the sustainable projects that we do both internally and externally. And so our model really stems back from when I first started the business 20 years ago. We're turning 20 this year, believe it or not.
Congratulations.
At the same time, to address those injustices, we also set up our foundation. And it was the principle that inspired me from Yvon Chouinard, who established Patagonia, where he had a principle of 1% capital for nature of his turnover. So that's literally how I started 20 years ago. And I'm proud to say over the years, that much has varied from 1.8 to 2.8% of our turnover that goes into our foundation. And that allows us to be able to do all the community work and conservation work. So that is funded purely through our guests. So when we first started off, I was a briefcase businessman. It was me trying to make a difference. Then I employed 20 people with my first safari camp. Now I wasn't just doing this alone, I was doing it with 20 others. And then I had my second camp, and then all of a sudden there were 50 people, all advocating for the same things with great passion. And I'm proud to say today there's over 800 people in the organization, and we're all very passionate about conservation and community. But we've gone that step further by now, 20 years later, to say that there's an African proverb which says, if you want to go fast, go it alone. If you want to go far, take others with you. And the last missing of the puzzle that we've been doing over the last few years is bringing our guests and making sure that they really, truly believe that they're part of the journey by including them. So at any one stage when my guests are in camp, they will encounter our foundation ambassadors who will sit them down, talk about the work that they do, and thank them for their support by merely being there, and bring them into our journey so that they understand what their contribution levels are. And, it's not about having slogan, it's not about just talking about it, but it's also about showing the guests on the ground what it is that we do. And in this space, one of the things that I truly believe is that we're all great storytellers. And all we need to do is tell our story. And that story is to the industry, that story is to the guest that's traveling. And it's very difficult for any of our guests not to want to become part of that.
I have a quick business question. So how does that percentage of what goes to the foundation, how do you determine how it evolves over time? Is it an excess of revenue that you can take away from expenses that doesn't hurt the bottom line of the business that then you feel comfortable delegating to the foundation?
Well, we've calculated what it costs us to run the business. We've got a cost structure for the business, but we've also, when we're pricing each of our camps, we need to factor in what it costs to conserve these areas. And out of that, we'll strip that off at the top line. But if we also have specific projects that we want to embark on outside of the scope of projects that we already have accounted for, then we'll create that as a different project. We'll scope it out, see how much it costs, and we'll specifically raise money towards that specific project. And our model is that, our foundation, the administration of our foundation must not come at a cost of donations from some of our guests, should not really come from anything else other than the fact that the business is covering its costs. So when we go out and raise, $100 for the set of glasses, that full $100 goes towards that particular project. So we allow for that with our pricing model so that we can administer our foundation and the projects that we have within that scope. But as I say, we do needs assessments in these community areas. And when you do needs assessment, you get to discover and choose which projects are sustainable and which projects will have the highest impact.
Thank you for sharing that. I just think it's important for other professionals to wrap their head around what does that business model look like, replicate, can they replicate that in their own communities?
One of the biggest things that we talk to the trade about, and we get a lot of support from our trade partners, is that when curating this kind of trip, to bring in and thread a conversation around the reason why I'm booking you into an African bush camps property is because of the fundamental work that they're doing on the ground through conservation and building community. And if you want to become a part of that and you'd like to contribute over and above by merely being there, you have that option. And whilst you're on the ground, you have an option. Here's the write-up of the different projects in the different camps that we're sending you to. And this is what your money is having an impact on. Very, very often, when guests come on the ground and see that, they want to participate longer term and become a bigger part of it. And these are the opportunities that we want to be able to afford our guests to have.
We are in a pivotal paradigm shift for travel. I mean, any of us that are in travel can resonate with that. I really believe travelers want to be able to leave a legacy. Travel is such a huge part of people's identity that allows them to be able to do that and leave a legacy. That's wonderful. Bex, let's get into a little bit. There's a story about why you wanted to get into this business. Will you share that with us as you talked about everyone has a story?
Yeah, I mean, I guess growing up in a little village where it all started, I grew up in a small little coal mining village once I started school at the age of 6. And we had encounters with wildlife in our gardens. I tell a story about chasing and warding off elephants at the age of 6 from my family gardens, but at the same time, also seeing tourists on safari and not really understanding or putting two and two together as to what was going on. And it was really until just before I left high school that I went and visited safari camps where some of my friends that had left school years before I did had already had jobs. And it was then that I discovered that actually it is possible to build a career around tourism. And what does this actually mean? And by the time I left school, I had multiple job offers to go and intern and start getting my background training. So I trained as a safari guide, and that got me very intrigued and interested in wildlife. It was until I traveled throughout Africa and recognized the conflict and the lack of harmonization between wildlife and man, the devastations of large tracts of land that we're losing at such an alarming rate, the large number of animals that we're losing at an alarming rate because man and wildlife are not in harmony. And there's this perception over the last 100 years that's ruined these areas around taking people out of communities or taking people out of the wilderness and having this principle that beings belong here, wildlife belongs here, so let's separate the two. We're not apart from nature, we are a part of it. And until such time that we can acknowledge that and find ways to build viable tourism enterprises that gives people a sense of stewardship and custodianship where they actually benefit as a result of tourism, then we're on a winning wicket. And that's what I try to create with African bush camps, that the communities that we serve intrinsically are vested in the wilderness by the fact that they're rewarded for being good custodians of these wilderness areas.
For travelers that are listening, and for someone that's never been on a safari, what defines your approach, your philosophy with your team?
I guess a lot of my success has come from the fact that my background is that of a guide. I'm not some person that was in some corporate organization in banking or insurance or some. I've organically grown up in the business. There's something about that that understands the language of guides and storytellers, people that want to go out there and tell their story. Now, when people go out and tell their story, it's not about having a prescribed story, but telling your story naturally, organically, the way you were brought up. And intuitively, a good guide will have all the resonances and all the nuances of what it takes to host, look after people, because essentially that's what we're doing in hospitality. And so that's the first thread I think that makes a remarkable difference in terms of understanding how you build this culture of safari hospitality where they can tell their story. But through that, then the thread is when a guide grows up in these landscapes, how do you get his story to change from that of information to that of inheritance? And every single one of my guides are very, very passionate. They truly believe that they are safeguarding their inheritance. And this is the culture that we build, not only through our guides, but through all our staff, whether it's hosts, camp managers, and right down to the people that do the reservations. We have the saying that be guided by the best. And that's not just with the guides out in the field, but it's the entire thread that we use with everybody in building a culture, what we call the African bush camps ways, where we share the same values and the same principles, and we're able to really make sure that people are aligned to this concept and this belief.
Think about, the word concierge. And really, if we adopted that same philosophy as a guide, how much more powerful of an experience you could provide to your guests. So that's a really interesting philosophy. How do you talk a lot about how proud you are that there are people that start in one position in your organization and they evolve into other positions and more authority and more responsibility. What are some of those stories, or what does that look like in safari African bush camp?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think again, is a differentiator for us is that we employ locally. When we go and create or start an opportunity at a camp, we take people from the local area and we work with those people in developing, building, and we give them all the soft skills and train and employ as much as possible from that local community. And that again gives them a sense of custodianship, a sense of ownership. And when you give people those kind of opportunities and they are part of a culture, a vibrant culture that they believe in, then people want to stay. And if people want to stay knowingly that they've got opportunities to grow throughout the organizations, I mean, literally, we still have people that have been with us for the 20-year journey. And it's about them also building a culture that they want, that they choose and elect. It's not about me. You know, our organization goes far bigger than me now with 800 people. And so building a culture where people want a sense of belonging, where you give people a sense of purpose. From when somebody came in as a casual, sweeping paths or working in this gallery, washing plates, to where he was inspired to want to be a waiter, then inspired to be wanting to be a chef, inspired to want to be a guide, inspired wanting to then move up to being a camp manager. And because there are all these examples throughout the organizations, people are inspired and say, I can see myself as that in 5 years' time. So it's action in service, and it's something that's very evident, and it's not something that we just talk about as a pipeline dream. So with these living examples, we also try to get them to mentor others because they have been through the journey, and that inspires others to come behind us.
Great example of not only how to build a culture, but how to avoid turnover, which every hospitality business, struggles with. Let's move into a little bit more of the traveler side of things. What does a real day at the camp look like? I think for a lot of us, I have not been lucky enough to come to Africa yet. Of course, I want to come one of these days. How do these different areas show up that you operate in, and what does a day in the camp look like?
I mean, they all vary, but in general, it starts with a little bit of a knock on your door with a soft, gentle voice saying knock, knock, or good morning. And if you are privileged enough to come to an African bush camps, you may even be offered a hot cup of tea or a hot coffee first thing in the morning delivered to your room. And very quickly, you're given about half an hour as the sun rises and it gets a little bit lighter, the birds are singing, and you would then within half an hour find yourself sitting around a little morning campfire. Your chef could be in front of the campfire, offer you more tea or coffee, might be making some toast for you over a fire, and that's where the stories begun. It might be that your guide would be pointing out that 2 hours ago, early in the morning, you heard a pride of lions calling in the distance, and you estimate that those lions are about 3 kilometers, maybe 4 kilometers. We're going to go out and look for them. So again, you have this build-up of the anticipation of your morning based on the night's activity, and straight after a light continental breakfast, you would jump into a car and drive in that direction. And safari is not just about seeing, but it's about smelling, it's about listening, it's about touching, really activating all your senses. So this sense of anticipation is a real differentiator for us because it's authentic. Nothing is ever guaranteed. You go out and you actually pursue the wildlife based on the different conditions, based on the different illustrations, based on the different indications that nature is showing you as it unfolds. You typically go out for anything from 3 to 4 hours in the morning. If it's a game drive, sometimes you might actually go out and drive for half an hour to a place. You come across a fresh set of footprints of a lion, elephant, or buffalo and decide that you're going to pursue them on foot and track them. And you get to learn how to track. But tracking is not just about the subject animal, but everything that you come across, whether it's a termite mound, whether it's a tree, or actually the actions of that particular track, what it's doing. You get to really immerse yourself in that experience at the time. Fast forward, you might stop about mid-morning or close to noon under a tree, take a break, have some refreshments, maybe even have a cup of tea or coffee. You generally end up back at the camp either for a late breakfast or brunch or lunchtime. After lunch, generally people like to take a rest, maybe have interaction with their guides or one of the foundation ambassadors where you sit and you talk about the different projects from the various community members. Maybe you might talk about the challenges, the victories of that particular area. If you want a lesson in geography, if you're in the Okavango Delta or the Zambezi Valley, how the topography works and everything else, because that's what it's all about. You might do that until about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the late afternoon, where you typically meet for what we call high tea. So you have something sweet and savory, and then you take off again for an afternoon activity. During that afternoon activity, again, it could be in a canoe, could be in a game drive vehicle, and typically you end up at sunset, where you have the special thing on safari we call sundowners. You watch the sunset and you celebrate the wins of the day. You tell each other stories about the highlights of the day, and then you slowly weave your way back to camp in time for refreshing, freshening up, and then going across and having dinner. And then typically dinner would finish anytime from about 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And those that are up for it would recline back to the campfire under the stars, where there's a lot more storytelling around with your guides around the campfire. That's typically what your day looks like. But we don't like all the days to be the same, Amy. We like to vary it up and have different variations of it, depending on the activities that you're doing. You may also, if you're up for it, be down for a full day's excursion where you take all your food, you take picnics, you leave camp early in the morning and only return late afternoon, having done a full day out in safari. That's also an option.
Sounds dreamy. Now, I'm assuming that there's a lot of interaction with the guests before they actually arrive. So you're garnering all of their interests and, what things they would really like to engage in. Again, not being able to guarantee those, but their preferences, right?
It's always good to know what people's preferences are. And what you find by the end of the safari quite often is that the preferences that people start with are often different to the preferences that they leave with. So it's great to have a preference up front and get to understand what people's aspirations are and try to deliver on that. But it's about the things that they don't know about. It's about the discoveries of the things that will surprise them that actually become very satisfying. There are people that arrive and they have zero interest in birding. And after they've seen the bright, beautiful, interesting birds and they get to know some of the behaviors, by the time they leave, they're intrigued and are asking about every single bird that they come across. And that's what's so interesting about being on safari, is the discovery and the learning of new things for people. And for us as guides, we really zoom in on that, because I might have seen lion or a specific bird a number of times, but seeing it through an excited guest, that intrigue and interest, it actually inspires me to the extent that it feels like it's even the first time that I'm seeing it. So there's an exchange and a dialogue that's very fascinating. And that comes from the passionate guides that we have.
And I bet that there are many times where something that doesn't seem that exciting, because it's human nature that after we see something over and over again, you just kind of overlooked it, but now it becomes something that you possibly highlight moving forward. It becomes a new experience to highlight. I want to talk about setting expectations, because I am guilty of wanting to see I love animals so much, but I've come to realize that they are not there to perform for us. It is, of course, a privilege and wonderful to see them. How do you set that expectation for the guest? And the people coming on safari are educated that there's still this excitement and anticipation. And if they don't see it, you, of course, don't want it to dampen their trip. How do you handle that?
I think this is where the real power of storytelling really helps, and making sure that when you come to Africa, first of all, you're booking a safari through a reputable operator that will give you all the information and will actually tell you that there's no guarantees. And if you want guarantees, there are places where you can get guarantees and you can give people the pros and cons. But, the trade partners that we work with, they know our story. They know our camps and how we do things. And they will explain. If you're an Africa specialist, all of that information is passed down to you so that you know what the expectations are. To the extent that everybody is excited, everybody wants to see lion, possibly leopard, rhino, etc., the big five. But all of that is actually disarmed when the guests meet a passionate guide who's able to bring many other interesting facets to them. And then it almost becomes irrelevant. I've been on safari with people that we've tracked lion on foot. We've heard lions in the distance, and sometimes we actually haven't found them. But they leave equally satisfied with the anticipation and the possibilities of seeing this animal. And it's about the whole as opposed to the individuals. But that's all really on the hands of the professional guide who's able to explain the surroundings and paint the holistic picture of what's actually out there.
So, you talked about responsible ways of doing things for your business. So, how do you convey that outwardly to the guest in your marketing in a way that doesn't, interfere or possibly get translated into greenwashing? And how does that also translate into your internal team and your operations?
The best thing internally that we've done is create ambassadors out of our teams. Ambassadors who are not just storytelling about the different projects and the impacts, but are able to demonstrate it directly to our guests so that when our guests go back home, they can talk about the impact and the things that they've learned from our teams. It really starts internally. And if you can achieve that internally, the external comes natural. The fact that we've partnered with some of our trade partners specifically to raise funds for specific projects, we demonstrate those projects, we showcase those projects, and we actually measure the impact too. So it's no longer about saying, this is what I do, and these are the areas that we're passionate about, and these are the areas that are making a difference. How are you making a difference? How are you measuring? Are you reducing the use of plastics? Are you making sure that you don't introduce chemicals in a very environmentally sensitive area? Are you employing locally? Are you making sure that you empower your own staff by providing opportunities for them to actually excel and grow within the business? Are you managing your waste properly? All of these things, you have to put measures and matrices in place that you can provide data to talk about the real impact that you're doing. When we first arrive at a place and there's no schools or the attendance of schools is very low, we do all of these things that give us, we call them baseline surveys. So we'll do a baseline survey in an area before we embark on a project. A year later, we monitor and evaluate it. 5 years later, and say, what is our real impact over the last 5 years? And so we're able to tell the story and demonstrate from a data-driven story as opposed to just greenwashing and telling a story, which many people can tell a story. But to tell a story that's factual, that's data-driven, makes a very big difference. And those are the things that we are putting in place constantly and re-engineering and learning and doing it better and better.
So when you're talking to the communities, are you trying to measure their perception of tourism and what something like African bush camps represents in their community, positive or
Yeah, so we like to see the projects that we embark on in these communities, we like to see them as partnerships with the community. And we do these needs assessments to say, what are the challenges that we can help solve through tourism? If we can build up our tourism business, that means we've got visitors coming. That means we've got cash flow. That means that you have a wilderness area that's thriving, that's got wildlife, that's got biodiversity. It's the only reason why tourists come. And if tourists come, people from the community have got employment. And not just employment, but we're able to have people start businesses, whether it's a sewing project or a chicken farming project or a vegetable farming project. And the consumers of those goods or those projects are visitors. So you very quickly change that shift from that of being a consumptive as man to that of becoming a custodian. I must look after this wilderness area and the wildlife in order for these landscapes to actually thrive. And that's the whole synopsis of what we do as a tourism enterprise. It's changing those shifts and giving people value and letting them know that the very areas that could degrade, if looked after, could result in a thriving community. And we've demonstrated that throughout.
So what misconceptions do you think that people have about Africa? I think everybody, again, if you haven't been to Africa, you have this idea in your mind. What are some of those out there that you want to debunk?
I think it is around the fact that people think, it's like an open zoo, right? People's perceptions are that you come and there's just thousands and millions of wildlife left, right, and center. And that it's like a big zoo, basically, but except wilder. It's not a big zoo. I mean, there are places that you can go to, but generally places that promote close proximity interactions with wildlife. We don't promote that because we think that's not representative of what Africa really is. What Africa really is a safari. It's an adventure. It's a journey. And what that means is that you come on safari and you create a bond with your guide and you go out together and learn about nature and pursue wildlife. You hunt for wildlife, not with a rifle, but of course with your eyes and camera. And when that's explained to people, I think it makes a very big difference.
High pressure environments, I'm sure, have taught you so many leadership lessons. What are those lessons that you think are, one or two that are the most important, and ones that could, again, translate to people that are working in different parts of the world?
It's using the power of our people. Often in hotels, the staff in the background are supposed to melt off and disappear, almost like shadows, without the guest interaction. We believe that we're all storytellers, whether it's the guy sweeping the paths in your camp, or it's the guy that is sweeping or mopping the deck, or it's the chef that comes out and tells his story about food preparation. All these are storytellers, and they need to be brought to the forefront as part of the experience. And that's what has set us apart from many other establishments or companies, where our people become part of the narrative and we allow them to tell their story.
That is the greatest lesson to translate to anyone in hospitality. Let's talk about non-negotiables. You've always wanted to go on a safari. You're planning a safari. What are those things that you have to do before planning this, and common mistakes you can avoid? What would those be?
Amy, it's the idea that a safari needs to be over large tracts of land, or that they need to do as many places as possible, visit as many countries as possible, because there's this perception that they will see a lot more. If people are going to experience or have this unique experience, they need to spend a minimum of 3 nights in one place, instead of moving around over a short period of time. So it's very important that in order for you to really immerse yourself and understand the true richness of a particular area, you need to spend time with the local experts, understanding what that area has to offer.
Let's talk about luxury. There's this evolution of what guests are, translation of what luxury means. What do you think is changing about the guest? How are you seeing that translated in the guests that come to visit African Bush Camp?
Well, luxury is defined by different people in different ways. At African bush camps, luxury is about space. Space in your tent, in your camp, but largely space in the wild, undisturbed, away from the crowds, and being under guidance from one of the top Africa naturalists. That is really how we define true luxury. It's not necessarily in the hardware in the form of a luxury lodge. It's really the spaces that are so rare nowadays around the world, and Africa still has those, and that's what makes us unique.
Okay, I'm going to ask a fun animal question, because that's why I do what I do. I hope that animals can continue to thrive in our world. If there was one animal that represented how African bush camps operates and takes care of their guests, what would that one animal be?
Well, if you look at our logo, Amy, it's actually the head of an elephant, the orange logo. And that's really meaningful to me, because firstly, it's the surname, our totem, our family name. And secondly, it's the one animal that I've had the most incredible experiences from when I was a little kid. But also from a behavioral point of view, elephants are, their behavior is that of a matriarchal society. So when you observe and watch the behaviors of elephants, there's so much of their behavior that reminds us of who we are as humans, and how we lead our lives. That incredible gentleness of a big elephant bull, the wisdom that they pass down to the younger teenagers, and also the youngsters, the care with which the mothers look after the rest of the herd and protect them, is an incredible testimony of nature at its best.
As someone is planning their safari, what is that first really important decision that you need to make after the company, choosing African safari bush camps. What is that next decision that's so important that is going to just set the pace and the trajectory of their entire trip?
Well, what's really important is that person to be able to have dialogue with an Africa specialist. So if this is an aspiration to come on a safari, it's really important that they speak to somebody who heavily invests in knowledge and education of who the right operators are on the ground for them to visit, where their hard-earned spent money is going to end up. Does that operator have an impact? Does that operator support ethical and sustainable practices in our part of the world? All of this contributes to a wholesome universe in the world of travel.
And what is one thing that you have to always pack for an African safari, in your opinion?
Well, if anything, a good pair of binoculars and a comfortable pair of shoes is pretty much what you need. Quite often people overlook the idea of binoculars because people often expect that, they're going to be seeing big game, big wildlife, so they don't really need that, or the thought that doesn't come across their heads. It's the small little things that are actually fascinating, that really grip you unexpectedly. I know so many people who've arrived totally disinterested in birds, and by the time they leave, they're semi-professional birders, because you just can't help but notice the most incredibly beautiful birds and fascinating behaviors.
Love that. That is a really good tip. Okay, how can everyone find you that's listening right now, follow along, and get inspired to book their safari with you?
We're on all the social channels, so Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have a website, and we also have a YouTube channel that showcases a lot of the areas that we operate in, but also showcases some of our people on the ground who have amazing stories to tell.
Wonderful. All right, finish this sentence. One last question. African bush camps exists because
we share and conserve Africa together. And this slogan comes really from the very inspiration of starting the business in the first place, where I noticed an injustice to the wildlife, the people, and the landscapes. And through tourism, we're able to really have an impact, not only in sharing the richness and the beauty of Africa with our visitors, but we can also take them along the journey and become part of conserving this planet. And that is what excites us at African Bush Camps.
Beautiful. Beks, thank you so much for your time. We can't wait for everyone to be inspired by your story, by all of your guide stories, and inspired enough to go book that African safari. So we thank you, and we can't wait to see you in person.
Thank you very much, Amy. It's been a pleasure.
That was your Conscious Check-In. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and let us know who you'd love to hear from next. Until next time, travel deeper and stay inspired.